early to testify today. That includes independent journalist George Chidi, a critical witness in the investigation into Georgia's alternate electors, and as of right now, he still has not testified. Also, former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan.
Now, new video showing that Mr. Duncan leaving the courthouse. After testifying, we heard from him about what he hopes will come of the proceedings.
This is a moment in time that hopefully we're able to get past in Georgia. There's been a lot of misinformation for a number of years, and this is our opportunity to get the real story out. My hope is that Americans believe us.
Tonight we have team coverage of everything that has happened at the courthouse over the past several hours and what is still to come, we believe. We begin with Doug Richards with more on today's key witnesses. Doug?
Yes, Jeff, for those of us who have been trying for a matter of days or even weeks to read the tea leaves here at the Fulton County Courthouse, finally some substance today. It was certainly the most vigorous day of the Trump grand jury proceedings so far, and may conclude as early as tonight or tomorrow. We saw former Democratic Senator Jen Jordan, who said that she sat for about 40 minutes with grand jurors, recounting her December 2020 audience with Rudy Giuliani at a time when the president's lawyer was spinning falsehoods about the 2020 election before Georgia legislative panels. There was also...
You would want to have the grand jury be able to look him in the face and say, you know, sir, did you feel intimidated? And then have him be able to answer that question for them and explain his answer.
So that was Clint Rucker. He was the chief assistant district attorney under former DA Paul Howard. He worked with Fonnie Willis for about 20 years. He was also talking about actually the appearance of Gabe Sterling. Gabe Sterling was a chief deputy to Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State. Sterling and Raffensperger were both on the famous January 2021 phone call where President Trump asked to find 11,780 votes, and that is one of the essential pieces of evidence in the case against Trump, which the grand jury has been weighing all day, which it may be continuing to weigh, and may either stop weighing tonight with a decision or continue on to tomorrow. Live at the Fulton County Courthouse, Doug Richards, 11Alive News.
So no official announcement has come down as of yet. You may have heard rumors, you may have seen on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, some of those places about potential charges swirling after a document spread online. Late this afternoon, the Fulton County Clerk Superior Magistrate Courts told us that document was fictitious. 11Alive Zach Merchant here in the studio to break it down. Zach, we have heard that President Trump's legal team unhappy about the events that have transpired so far.
Very unhappy, and it's been an unusual sort of day for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is that this document may have come out. We don't know exactly. Now let's break it down here, and right off the top, we want to be very, very clear. So far, no indictment has been made public, but a report earlier today from a wire service has been causing controversy around the court. Around noon today, Reuters reported that a document was briefly posted to the court website showing former President Donald Trump facing a RICO charge, as well as multiple other charges for making false statements and forgery. In a statement, the clerk's office called that document, quote, fictitious. The statement goes on to say that documents that do not bear an official case number, a filing date, or the name of the clerk of courts all in concert are not official filings and should not be treated as such. We should note here that what was shared online appears to match the formatting and the wording of other Fulton County court records available typically online. Also, as a part of the legal process, we want to note it's not unusual for the DA's office to work with the clerk to get all of the charging documents ready prior to an indictment. But in a statement sent just hours ago, Mr. Trump's attorneys condemned this entire saga, arguing that it shows a lack of professionalism within the district attorney's office, saying a proposed indictment should only be in the hands of the DA's office.
So this is somewhat of a remedial question. Is it unusual for indictments to be issued this late in the evening past 8 p.m.?
I think what our legal analysts would tell you, and I think what a lot of lawyers and a lot of people in the legal community would tell you, is that very little of what's happening tonight is particularly normal. It's very rare for a court to go past that 5 o'clock closing time, and so far, the court is still in session as best we know.
We'll see what happens. I mean, it's very difficult to handicap here. Everybody seems to have an opinion or a thought or an observation or a musing, but the truth seems to be very, very far away right now.
Yes, it does, but we're going to be staying on it all night.
Thank you, Zach. Appreciate it.
All right, Zach, thank you so much for that. And I did want to bring this up. Our Nick Wooten is actually inside of one of the courtrooms. He just tweeted, "Just waiting. It's quiet in Judge McBurney's courtroom. We are expected to hear something by 8:30. But we want to take you now outside. That's where we find 11Alive's Joe Ripley. You've been very busy out there, Joe. We've seen some videos of you hustling to speak to former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan. But we know that security will remain tight until after that announcement is made. Joe, what are you seeing now this late in the day?
Yes, security has been tight and it will remain tight all throughout the night here outside the Fulton County Courthouse. You can see a few of the Fulton County Sheriff's Patrol vehicles out here. We've seen a couple actually leave, a couple more circling the block here just to secure the perimeter of the area. We've also seen a lot of folks going to the final night of Beyonce's concert, her Renaissance tour here in Atlanta. So a few things to keep their eyes on. Let's show you this guy. His name is Mark. He was out here with a sign saying, "Fonnie, just do it," referring to Fulton County District Attorney Fonnie Willis in this election probe and actually filing indictments. We'll see when that may happen, and we understand that could potentially happen at any hour as of right now. But Mark was telling me that he hopes this is about the truth getting out. He hopes that democracy is upheld at the end of the day. I'll give you a little bit of a listen to what he told me earlier on just moments ago.
I made the effort to go do my Democratic small d duty. And I just think no matter who you are, no matter whether you're Republican, Democrat, or independent, that your vote should count. And so.
And we will have to see whether it's tonight or tomorrow whether those indictments line up with what Mark believes happened in Georgia's 2020 election. You mentioned Jeff Duncan earlier. The former lieutenant governor of Georgia told me this is about the same thing, upholding truth and democracy. He says he's sticking by the fact that Georgia's 2020 election was fair and integral.
Jeff Duncan, a graduate of Georgia Tech and a former baseball player there at the Institute. Tonight, Rudy Giuliani is commenting on the possibility that he or his past client, former President Trump, could be indicted in Fulton County. This just into our newsroom. Take a listen.
You worried about a possible indictment in Fulton County, Georgia, sir?
I shouldn't be. I didn't do anything wrong. But I mean, that doesn't stop some of these people from, I mean, it's ridiculous. This would be the fourth indictment of Donald Trump in an election year. I guess we can figure out that these really aren't indictments. These are attempts to prevent him from running for president of the United States.
In the aftermath of the 2020 election, Mr. Giuliani was a lawyer for the Trump campaign. The Fulton DA's office says that he perpetuated multiple false claims of election fraud, including a myth about election workers bringing suitcases of unlawful ballots into State Farm Arena where votes were being counted at the time. Prosecutors say he continued to push those claims despite the fact that they were quickly debunked by the Secretary of State's office. Now, right now, you can find our full coverage of the grand jury proceedings on 11alive.com. If you text the word investigation to the number on your screen, we will send you a link straight to your phone, and that number is 404-885-7600.
All right, we want to get to some more headlines that are coming into our newsroom. The GBI continues investigating the traffic stop that led to the death of a 62-year-old church deacon. According to officials, Johnny Holman died Thursday after an altercation with an Atlanta police officer. 11Alive's Bobeth Yates has an update for us tonight.
Well, I'm at the Mary Schei Scott Memorial Park in Atlanta, and this is where family and friends of Johnny Holman will gather Tuesday to pay tribute to him. And they say even though this investigation is ongoing, he didn't deserve to die. According to information released by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, around 11:30 Thursday night, 62-year-old Johnny Holman called the police after being in a two-car accident. In a statement from APD about the incident, officials wrote the officer arrived on scene to investigate the incident, determined Holman was the at-fault driver, and he became aggressive and uncooperative. But in an 11Alive interview last week with Holman's daughter, Rita Holman, who was on the phone with her father at the time, described the officer.
He was going, baby, and then I just hear the police officers in the background being aggressive with him, saying, "You're going to do what I say."
In a statement placed on the GoFundMe page to help with funeral expenses, Arnita wrote, "My family and I are devastated and overwhelmed over the saddened and tragic incident. My dad didn't deserve this. We don't deserve this." Police have not released the exact details of the physical altercation between the APD officer and Holman, but police say a taser was involved.
He was like, "Help me, I can't breathe, help me." And he was like, "Why would you do an old man like me like that? Why would you do me like that?"
Again, family and friends of Johnny Holman will gather here at the Mary Shy Scott Memorial Park tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, for a balloon release and vigil in his honor. Bo Beth Yates, 11Alive News.
The U.S. Department of Education releasing new guidance to help colleges and universities who want to ensure student diversity. This comes after a U.S. Supreme Court decision effectively banning affirmative action-driven admission policies. Now, the new guidance from the Biden administration suggesting that college admissions officials are allowed to consider how race has impacted students' life, but can't use overall demographic data to influence their decisions. The guidance also includes ideas for encouraging diversity in the student body, like outreach and recruitment. It also includes legal resources for school officials. Federal student loan payments now are coming back, and borrowers say they are facing a tough choice right now. Either make their payments or not be able to afford the basic necessities of life. A new survey from Credit Karma found 56% of borrowers say they will be forced to resume payments are covering things like rent and groceries. Interest will then begin to accumulate on September 1st, and payments will be due again in October.
All right, and speaking of those payments, there's actually some questions coming in that as repayment date gets closer, parents are wondering, okay, if I took out a loan to help my child pay for college, what do I do? So tonight we are verifying, can Parent Plus loans qualify for forgiveness? Our sources are the U.S. Department of Education, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And we know Parent Plus loans cannot be forgiven through the SAVE plan, but there are options. Parent Plus borrowers can have their loans forgiven after a certain period of time if they enroll in a specific income-driven payment plan or pursue public service loan forgiveness. So these options require Parent Plus borrowers to consolidate loans beforehand, and this needs to happen even if you only took out one loan. You can apply for consolidation on the Department of Education's website. So we can verify, yes, federal Parent Plus loans can qualify for forgiveness if they are consolidated.
All right, we are getting the very latest from NBC News, which is saying right now that the vote is being taken right now on the possibility of indictments. We know that they were slated to talk with 10. We can confirm they spoke with 7. If those 7 knew what was going to take place here, or they knew how they were going to vote, then they would not necessarily have to hear from the other 3. And that would include George Chidi, who we have seen.
And I believe he did not speak to the grand jury. He was one of the 10. We do know that former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan spoke. We know that Gabriel Sterling spoke earlier today. We know that B. Wen, as well as Jen Jordan, both spoke, as well as several witnesses that we do not know about that spoke. But we are seeing, I'm actually pulling up NBC's website right now. They are reporting that the Fulton County grand jury is voting right now in the Georgia case. This is something that we've been waiting for all day. Our reporter Nick Wooten as well as Rebecca Lindstrom are inside of the courtroom. Nick recently tweeting out that it was very quiet. Mick Burney came in, I would say about an hour ago, telling reporters, you know, I've been asked to stay for another hour. And it's also notable to say that the Fulton County Courthouse, it closes at 5 p.m.
Right.
And it's now 8:14, so they are now well over the time for it to close.
We heard from Zach Merchant a couple of minutes ago talking about how this is unusual. It is to be going this late on the possibility of indictments with them looming at this point. But right now we want to go to downtown Atlanta.
And we are going to hear from our Caitlin Ross. Caitlin, you're outside of the courthouse for us. What are you hearing at this moment?
Well, right now, everyone's eyes are just really glued to the front door, waiting to see if anyone else is going to come out. We've been out here for hours waiting for any word. We did see witnesses coming in and out, some people speaking with us, others saying they didn't want to disrupt the process. They were just going to wait to see what shook out. We did know that there was a hard 8:30 out time. Judge Robert McBurney saying that if it went past 8:30, he was going to tell folks to come back tomorrow morning and get back into it then. But it looks like we might have an answer before then. So it's actually kind of quiet out here. There are dozens and dozens of television and print reporters out here. Everybody's been talking all day, and now I think you can really feel the anticipation. People are waiting to see what the answer is going to be, and they're waiting really in the middle of the street because they have Prior Street completely blocked off. There are police officers with their lights running. They've been there all day. Anyone who tries to walk past the barricades is actually redirected and sent back out. There was a protester who showed up about an hour ago who was carrying a sign that said, "Fani, just do it." He tried to get behind the barricades. He was escorted out quickly by police. He's still standing over there on the corner. But all of those police officers are really at the ready. We saw Sheriff Pat Labatt maybe 2 hours ago. He kind of turned around and smiled before heading inside the courthouse. But after that, we haven't seen anyone else come out. So, Jeff and Faith, right now, it's really just a waiting game as we see what's going to happen next.
Caitlin, this is somewhat of an ambiguous question, but here goes. Give me a vibe, if you would, about what you are seeing, what you are hearing, and what the mood is there. And if it's primarily reporters, primarily law enforcement, that you simply don't see individuals who are being allowed into this area at this point of the night.
I would say the majority are media members. It's people from national and local news outlets all set up just behind us. We have the photographers from the New York Times, the AJC, all waiting to get that shot as people come out the door. There are a lot of law enforcement officials here lining both sides of Prior Street. And 45 minutes ago, I just walked around the courthouse and there were actually police officers at every single entry and exit point. They have someone stationed outside the Sally Port running the lights, at attention, waiting to see what's going to happen next. So the majority definitely media members, a lot of law enforcement, and then I think we did see 2 protesters here. So the one I mentioned earlier who got behind the barricades, and then there was another man carrying a sign with Hillary Clinton's face on it, and he's just been walking back and forth talking to different media members for about 3 hours now.
All right, Caitlin, thank you so much. And you are outside of the courthouse. Another one of our reporters outside is 11Alive's Joe Ripley. He's been out there all day digging, chasing folks who are actually inside, and I want to ask him about that. So, Joe, we're going to get over to 11Alive's Joe Ripley right now. I see we still have Caitlin here. But once again, Joe has been talking about and following the issues of security and seeing who's coming in and coming out of the courthouse. And there's Joe right now. So, Joe, I see police lights behind you. I see streets blocked off. So can you paint a picture for me of what you are seeing? And if you could dive a little bit into the interview, you chased down former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan moments after he left from testifying. So we'd love to know your input on that.
Sure, let's first paint the scene for you. Caitlin did a great job doing that. We're just down the street from her at the intersection of Prior and MLK here. You can see what we've been seeing really pretty much all day here, the blue flashing lights here from the Fulton County Sheriff's Deputies patrol vehicles as folks try to navigate here around what is this huge scrum here, and police have really been directing traffic all day long outside of the Fulton County Courthouse. It's been a watch and wait and see approach as we await the grand jury's vote to see if former President Trump and possibly others could be indicted in connection with Georgia's 2020 presidential election. A note related to that, we've seen plenty of witnesses all day long, from state representatives like B. Wynn and Jen Jordan to former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, which I saw him coming out of the Prior Street gate here on the backside of the Fulton County Courthouse. Once we saw him, we had to hustle, but we ended up catching up with him, talking to him about what he witnessed today, what he experienced as a witness in this election investigation. We asked him about the sort of questions he got. He wouldn't really go into much detail about that. All he said was that he answered whatever questions were thrown his way to the best of his ability. He also told me this is about upholding democracy, about the truth getting out, and this is his way of sticking to his guns, saying that Georgia's 2020 election should be upheld as a fair election, something that has been contested by former President Trump. We've even heard as late as today day. The former president going on social media, blasting Jeff Duncan and others for what they're saying and what's coming out in this election investigation. Jeff Duncan was surrounded by media. I haven't seen that many people around one person in a long time, but it just goes to show you a lot of people want to hear what he has to say. This grand jury obviously wanted to hear what he had to say, and his testimony could make or break the defense for former President Trump. Keeping in mind, this election investigation is centering around three critical issues and key angles here. We will get into much more of that coming up later on tonight. We'll send things back to you as we monitor things outside of the Fulton County Courthouse.
We're getting close, Joe, and I do want to read something. If you go on Joe's social media, you can see that video, but Jeff Duncan, he did say, as a country, we'll finally figure out exactly what happened and let Americans decide. Instead of misinformation and tweets, to let America decide what happens to us. That was part of the interview as there was a scrum of reporters of Jeff Duncan leaving that courthouse.
All right, let's stay on the subject of Jeff Duncan for a moment. I want to bring in Doug Richards right now, who has covered politics in our fair region for many decades. And Doug, when I think about Jeff Duncan, I think about this is a Georgia Tech guy who was a baseball player, former lieutenant governor, very ambitious, it would seem. He has positioned himself on national cable as a political pundit, political expert. How do you think this impacts him? And there have been a lot of conjecture about him running perhaps for the U.S. Senate or perhaps for the governor's seat. How do you think this impacts him with the GOP around our state?
Well, the GOP around the state still, the majority of them seem to still be in the camp of former President Trump. And Jeff Duncan is the one of the loudest voices that says that the GOP needs to find another camp. He talked today about Republican 2.0, getting past the Trump presence in the party and moving on to something else, someone who is less indictment prone, perhaps. It is worth talking about, perhaps just for a moment, this grand jury. The grand jury, we know, was 23 persons. We know that a grand jury can hear evidence with 16 of the 23 present. And we also know, and it's essential here, that they can render an indictment with a mere majority vote. 12 grand jurors out of the 23 need to vote yes for an indictment. So this is nothing like a petit jury, a criminal jury trial. And the other thing to know is that these grand jurors have been around each other for a period of weeks, taking up hundreds of other cases. They have gotten a sense of each other, probably not have talked a lot, if at all, about the Trump case. But during the course of today, one can picture the grand jurors having gotten to know each other, sort of reading each other's sense of what they're seeing during the testimony, their ability to question witnesses, which petit jury jurors cannot do at all. The attorneys have to do all the questioning. These grand jurors can pipe up and ask anything they want of the lawyers and of all the witnesses that show up. And from the questions, presumably in the room, grand jurors can get a sense of how that they can read the room. And it may be that in the course of seeing what they saw today, they may be driving a decision to either make a decision tonight or say, you know what, we want to sleep on it and we want to hear the lawyers' arguments tomorrow about what's going on. The thing is, and I may not be right about this, the grand jury is not dismissed after today. They still have, there are still other cases out there that need to be indicted, and they are a regular grand jury that has been among the grand jury, the two grand juries that have returned these hundreds of indictments over the last several weeks. So it's, you know, human needs like sleep may be driving them now, but also the irresistible sort of human impulse, having gotten to know each other and knowing that they're probably in a historic moment right now, that may be just driving what they're deciding to do in terms of whether to make a decision tonight or whether to get some rest and do it again tomorrow. That's what I've got on Jeff Duncan and the grand jury.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, Doug, in journalism, whether it's print or electronic, we're very aware of grand juries, but truth be told, very seldom have you seen extensive reporting on the inner workings of grand juries or how they are different from a court of law, and it has been interesting to give everyone a primer about how these processes work and how we really have been schooled over the case of the last couple of weeks to really learn how it works.
It seems like everybody's getting a little dose of law school.
A little bit.
You know, there's somebody here that actually has been to law school, though, and we want to get to him right now. It's Zach Merchant, and we want to talk about a really interesting development that happened here that kind of put everybody on high alert. There was a document seemingly coming from the court that listed several charges, and it had Donald Trump's name on it.
Yes, it did.
But it turns out that those weren't charges. So what happened here?
It's sort of the question of the night right now, or at least it was until just a little bit ago when we found out that it appears the grand jurors may be voting at this moment. But let's rewind a little bit earlier in the day. And before we do, I want to be super clear right off the top. So far, no indictment has been made public. But a report earlier today has been causing controversy and a fair bit of hand-wringing around the court. Around noon today, Reuters, a wire service, reported that a document was briefly posted to the court website showing former President Donald Trump facing a RICO charge, as well as multiple other charges for making false statements and forgery. In a statement not long after that report was published, the clerk's office called that document, quote, fictitious. The statement went on to say that documents that do not bear an official case number, a filing date, and the name of the clerk of courts are not official filings and should not be treated as such. It should be noted what was shared online and what appeared in that Reuters report appears to match the usual formatting and wording of other Fulton County court records typically available online. And as a part of the legal process, it's not unusual for the DA's office to work with the clerk to get all of the charging documents ready prior to an indictment. But in a statement sent just hours ago, late this afternoon, Mr. Trump's attorneys condemned this entire saga, arguing that as far as this document release, maybe not release, goes, it shows a lack of professionalism within the district attorney's office, saying a proposed indictment should only be in the hands of the DA's office.
So how does that happen? I mean, how does someone release that? How does that get out there and then it's labeled as fictitious, where it clearly probably is not?
Well, to be clear,
Clearly.
Yeah, to be clear, I don't know if we can even say that much. It's sort of the mystery of the day, or at least, again, it was until we got into the situation where we are now, where we may be waiting for grand jurors to release the results of their view, at least, on this case. It could be a number of things. It could be somebody in the clerk's office posted something too early. It could be something completely fictitious, like the clerk's office is saying. I think this is going to be, right now it feels like maybe a bump in the road along the day as we move towards what will be the bigger news, if any indictments are announced. But it feels like something we may be spending more time looking at as the days go forward.
And if I could jump in here, the Trump campaign did respond to this. I believe it was Drew Findling and Jennifer Little. They issued a statement saying that this was not an administrative mistake. And they refer to the case number and the judge's name. As we know, the Fulton County, the court says, well, you know what, this isn't real. It doesn't look real. It's fictitious. But the Trump campaign and then a lot of Trump supporters have been retweeting this, saying, how could you issue charges without the grand jury? So now I wonder if it's going to be a headache for the courts.
Yeah, and again, want to be very clear, no charges have been issued so far, but I think if nothing else, it's an indication that folks who are supportive of the former president, Drew Findling is one of his attorneys, they're going to try to seize on anything they can get their hands on, as attorneys will.
Well, they're going to use it, they're going to try to politicize it, because if you frame it in such a way, that is one defense against indictments if they do indeed come.
And we should note as well that history has shown that as former president is in the spotlight, as he is facing criminal cases, and currently is facing 3 criminal cases in 3 jurisdictions around the country right now, in New York, in Florida, and in federal court out of D.C., fundraising numbers have increasingly gone up for him as this news has developed. His poll numbers have gone up. And so there's sort of this two-track situation happening here. There's the legal side and the political side.
Yeah, and we heard from Rudy Giuliani a couple of minutes ago during this broadcast where he framed it in that political way as well, that here we are coming upon an election year. Donald Trump is once again running for the presidency. And this is one way that he believes Democrats are trying to stop him. So there's your politics in a nutshell.
Yeah, and I don't want to get out over our skis here, but there have been indications that if there is an indictment brought by District Attorney Fani Willis's office, and importantly, and this is something kind of verbiage we use a lot, if an indictment is brought, but really most importantly, it's whether a grand jury, a majority of grand jurors sign off on that indictment and say, yes, there was probable cause that a crime was committed here. If that happens, there have been indications that there could be a number of defendants. The federal indictment recently released by federal special counsel Jack Smith had only one named defendant, that was former President Donald Trump, but there were 6 unnamed, unindicted co-conspirators. So if that's any indication, there could potentially be, again, if there is an indictment, we're sort of in telescoped
and or
out.
multiple indictments,
but this could be a broad thing, potentially. It could be nothing. The grand jury could return a no bill. We're just going to have to watch closely.
News outlets quickly figured out who those co-conspirators are, at least most of them.
All but the 6th one.
All but the 6th.
All right, Zach, thank you. It has been more than 2 years since the 2020 election, and here's what we know. The investigation into the election meddling has taken almost just as long.
Yeah, it's been a long and kind of confusing road, so we're going to break down exactly how we got here.
It all started in the days after the 2020 election. Then President Trump had just come up short and refused to concede. His allies wasted no time going on the offense to overturn the results, first calling for Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to resign. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham making one of the first phone calls into Raffensperger's office to discuss Georgia's results.
The future of the country hangs in the balance.
On December 3rd, Rudy Giuliani, Trump's then attorney, met Georgia state senators and began claiming Fulton County's election workers committed ballot fraud while counting votes at State Farm Arena. Then came a Trump request for a special state legislative session to investigate voter fraud. It was quickly shut down by Governor Brian Kemp. By mid-December, 16 fake Republican electors signed illegitimate certificates claiming Trump's victory during a meeting at the state capitol. All of these events setting in motion a phone call between Trump and Raffensperger on January 2nd, 2021.
I just want to find 11,780 votes.
After the phone call was leaked, Trump found himself in the crosshairs of newly elected Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis.
Obviously, it's been reported around the world, that phone call, and so we have said, yes, that is part of the investigation, but we're not narrowing it to that.
A year after the Trump-Raffensperger call, DA Willis seated a special grand jury to investigate the election probe. Over the next 8 months, several of those subpoenaed refused to comply before eventually being ordered to testify. Trump himself was never called. In January 2023, after 75 witnesses testified, the jurors wrapped up their investigation.
We heard a lot of very compelling things, like a lot of very compelling evidence, a lot of very interesting things, and things that we didn't expect.
The jurors have told media outlets they heard at least 3 recorded phone calls between Trump and Georgia officials. The jury's report, which was partially released to the public, recommended perjury charges against at least 1 witness. But due to redactions, names were not disclosed. Former President Trump has continued to deny any wrongdoing and has repeatedly attacked DA Willis.
They've got a local racist Democrat district attorney in Atlanta who is doing everything in her power to indict me over an absolutely perfect phone call.
All right, let's talk about the person in charge of this investigation. Fulton County DA Fani Willis, she was elected in 2020. She began investigating election tampering in February of 2021, shortly after the infamous Trump call to Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger.
And she convened a special purpose grand jury focusing solely on election fraud back in spring of 2022.
Fani Willis joined the Fulton County DA's office in 2001 and eventually became a top prosecutor.
Widespread
cheating.
She served as lead prosecutor in the Atlanta Public Schools cheating scandal, where around 36 educators were convicted or confessed to changing students' standardized test answers in 2009. It's considered the longest criminal trial in Georgia history, with 6 still active appeals.
I think that the case was well tried. I think the judge was very cautious. I think that the case will hold up on appeal.
Willis briefly served as City of South Fulton Chief Magistrate Judge and in 2020 successfully ran to become Fulton District Attorney, defeating her former boss, Paul Howard.
She saw what was going wrong, and she decided she had to do something to change that, to make it right.
Attorney Darrell Cohen previously worked with Willis, saw her in the courthouse. He says she ran a campaign platform built on bringing honesty and integrity to the office.
So on my first day in office, this was the breaking news story.
I just want to find 11,780 votes.
The day before Willis took office, then President Donald Trump made that famous phone call to Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, prompting Willis to investigate Georgia's 2020 election. Former U.S. District Attorney Michael Moore says Willis chose to request a special grand jury to investigate Trump and others in his circle, but did not need to.
She could have moved forward had she chosen to do so on a very simple, clean-cut case. She elected to use the special purpose grand jury to get more information, to bring more witnesses in there.
I am not going to negotiate with gang members. I am not going to allow pleas. We are going to find you. We are going to convict you, and we're going to send you to the prison for the rest of your days.
In May 2022, Willis indicted around 24 people she believes are in an alleged gang called Young Slime Life. Nearly half of the defendants entered plea agreements. More than a dozen are now on trial for RICO charges. As Willis faces a possible re-election bid, Cohen reflects on her first term and her legacy in trusting the long game to secure convictions.
She was honest, she had integrity, she didn't BS with you about the case. She'd talk to you, and she was a real person. There was no pretense with Fani. She just did what needed to be done and then moved on.
All right, so there you have a little bit of background on the DA Fani Willis, and we want to get right back out to the courthouse, where I just looked inside the courthouse. Nick Wooten has been tweeting. He says about 2 minutes ago, it's past 8:30, still nothing yet, still very quiet. So Caitlin, we want to ask you, so I want to talk about the security around the courthouse. Sheriff Pat Labat's office started shutting down Pryor Street between MLK and Mitchell. They said it was going to be closed starting, I believe, last Monday morning till August 18th. And you are there, you are witnessing it. So can you paint a picture for us of who you are still seeing out there? And we can see now that the sun has gone down.
Yeah, Faith, it got dark out here very quickly, and you're starting to see a lot of people gather right outside the front doors, people really waiting to see who's going to come out, when that announcement is going to be made. And the entire street has been shut down all day to car traffic. So pedestrian traffic has still been let through, and you saw a few people kind of peeking their head around trying to figure out what was going on down here. But for the most part, it's journalists who all have their television or still cameras, their notebooks out, waiting to get any sort of information from inside the courtroom, people waiting outside the clerk's office for that news, and then you have a very large police presence. All day there have been police officers with sirens, lights, armed guards at every single entry and exit to the Fulton County Courthouse, and if you stepped 1 foot over the barrier, they immediately said, "Step back, ma'am, you need to be behind the barrier." So they took it really seriously all day. We did see some people coming and going from the courthouse on official business. We also saw some of the witnesses called to testify in this grand jury hearing walking right out the front door. That's where Joe Ripley was able to catch up with the former lieutenant governor. He answered a few questions, but for the most part, people called to testify here didn't have much to say. They said they wanted to see this play out, they wanted to see what was going to happen, and they didn't want to interfere with these proceedings in any way. And so that's where we are right now. We're waiting, people almost breathlessly waiting to see what's going to happen. It's been really busy down here all day. People saying, "Have you heard anything? Do you know what's going on?" And then about 30 minutes, we got the word that the grand jury was voting. They they had the case, and since then it's been very quiet. People really huddled around trying to see when someone's going to come out and announce what happened. We have heard from some of the bailiffs that if there is a news conference, it's going to be right here on the courthouse steps. So that's going to be a scramble for sure. We don't know whether or not people are going to answer questions. We don't know what sort of documentation we're going to have access to right away, because all of this is really bizarre. The Fulton County Courthouse closes at 5 p.m. sharp most days, and it was just before 5 that we got word that Justice Robert McBurney said, "I'm going to stay late here tonight. I've been asked to stay late, and I'm going to keep this courthouse open till at least 8:30. He said he'd let us know if anything changed. He advised people at some point, go get dinner. I want to make sure that you're fed because this could be a while. But he said at 8:30 tonight, if we don't have an answer, we're either shutting this down and coming back tomorrow, or we're going to see what you have." And so it looks right now, Faith and Jeff, like we're going to see what they have.
All right, Caitlin. And something notable, like she said, the courthouse closed at 5. It's now 8:40. Judge McBurney saying that he would stay open until at least 8:30. We're now 10 minutes beyond that, so it's going to be interesting to see if they're going to wait this out for the long run.
All right, not that far away from where Caitlin Ross is right now, Doug Richards is standing by. Doug, I want to talk to you about District Attorney Fani Willis, who is an expert on RICO charges. In fact, when you think about her, you think about how aggressive she was in 2015 with the APS cheating scandal, in which she used RICO charges there. And for that matter, she's used it to prosecute gang cases as well, including that one that is centered on the Atlanta rapper Young Thug. So this is all very curious how RICO plays in the state of Georgia versus other places around the country. It is more expansive, it is more broad-reaching.
Right, and so if there is a RICO charge that is being considered by this grand jury, an expansive RICO charge, one would think that it might take more than one day of testimony and a few hours of conversation after the testimony is over to put that RICO charge into context and to decide whether or not to make that part of an indictment. One of the things that has taken place that we know of, though, is that this grand jury has already had some practice with RICO. There have been RICO indictments returned since early July when this and another grand jury got together. And so what I've been told is that it would have been smart for Fani Willis and her staff to have sort of greased the skids a little bit with the grand jury to say, so what we've got here is a sort of garden variety RICO case, it's a drug case or a gang case or something like that. Here's how we're wrapping it together as a racketeering case, and here's why it's a racketeering case. And in this drug case, it's sort of, the lines are perhaps simpler. Now, you have a grand jury that is familiar, doesn't need to be told what RICO is, doesn't necessarily need to know how interwoven evidence needs to be in order to make it a RICO case, and they're presented with this case against President Trump, and they're calling that a RICO case also. And at this point, the grand jurors are saying, oh yeah, we've heard of this RICO before, we've seen how it's worked before in previous indictments we've returned. We don't need to be reschooled on RICO. Present your RICO evidence and we will act on it. Again, this is I don't have any inside knowledge as to what they're actually saying in the jury room, but it would make sense that if they have seen RICO cases before, and if they're presenting a RICO case against former President Trump right now, that these grand jurors would not necessarily need, to take tomorrow maybe to decide on it. It may be that all that complexity is coming down and is making at least a measure of sense to perhaps a majority of the grand jurors, if in fact that's what we're doing in this highly speculative scenario on RICO.
Doug, I think everybody who's watching right now who didn't go to law school, has never passed the bar anywhere, is hearing all of this RICO and going, my goodness, how can the case of Young Thug or APS or organized crime, how is that all tied together and the correlation? And I think simply put, it is a group of individuals who are united in the common goal of misadventure. That's probably the best way to describe RICO in a couple of declarative sentences.
And it is expansive in a way that it is not limited necessarily to Fulton County. Once it becomes a RICO case, if in fact this becomes one, you have evidence that will come from outside of Fulton County, from Washington, D.C. The attack on the Capitol can be used in a RICO case to show that an organized crime organization had that element of criminality within its corrupt organization. You could go to Coffee County, Georgia, the place where Trump operatives entered an election office on January 7th, 2021, scanned all the scanned ballot images, or scanned voting machine images in order to see how the voting machines worked and access them in a way that tech experts say could hack them in future elections. The Secretary of State's office says that's not the case. Tech experts say, no, it actually is the case. That's like a whole separate story, but it nonetheless can be woven into a sort of web of criminality as pertains to racketeering. And yes, you know, you're talking about Young Thug, and you're talking about mafia cases, and you're talking about school teachers who had an organized effort district-wide in the city of Atlanta close to 10 years ago as organized crime elements. But you also, I mean, I don't know that there has ever been a RICO case prosecuted that has the characteristics of this case. Pretty sure it's not the case, since no former president has had these kind of criminal charges and criminal filings posted against him. But it does fit within a pattern that prosecutors are have grown accustomed to building when they're talking to grand juries, and then if the grand juries indict, when they get back to trial juries, which obviously is where this would ultimately go if there is an indictment tonight or tomorrow.
All right, Doug, thanks. I think, Doug, you really reinforce, and Zach as well, of how complicated these issues become as far as the court system in the United States is one that is not user-friendly, depending on what level you are at or depending on how much money you may have. I mean, it is a very complicated system of which there's all kinds of checks and balances, yet there's all kinds of people that fall through the net. It's a very complicated means,
Absolutely.
But the best means we have ever determined in terms of trying to define what is fair and what is not.
And while we have Doug here, Doug, I want to let you know, I don't know if you know this, but McBurney has just entered the courtroom. Our Nick Wooten just tweeted that seconds ago. We're also hearing from George Chidi, who was the independent journalist who was called to testify. He says that he did not need to testify. They are done. So it looks like there's some movement that's about to happen. It looks like we see George Chidi right there. And I wonder if we can listen in to hear what he's saying here. Do we have audio?
About
here we are.
Whether or not a district attorney can use the power of her office to tell a journalist what to do is mooted. I didn't have to say anything. Would have been willing to testify. Showed up at 4 o'clock, like they asked me to. Sat there watching the paint dry.
What do you think of the fact that they got that far and you weren't called? What are they doing?
Well, I would assume. I'm a journalist, I shouldn't assume anything. But I assume they're voting right now. Like if they don't need, because the folks who are working for Fannie Willis's office said, "You're done. You don't. We will not need you now." So it means I'm not coming back tomorrow. Okay. I mean, I'm assuming I'm not going to come back tomorrow. Maybe they'll call me, but I don't think they will.
So you assume that they wanted to ask you about what you saw that day. And for those people that don't know what you saw that day, what did you see? Did you see people that were startled when you came in the room?
So I don't know if I'd call them startled. Let me just tell the whole thing really quickly. I was at the Georgia Capitol on December 14th. Like many of you, I might add, who didn't get subpoenas, because I wanted to observe the electoral vote, and I was concerned that there would be shenanigans of some sort. I saw a person I recognized as one of somebody who would have been a Republican elector if Trump had won the state, who ignored me in a weird way and went into a room on the second floor of the Capitol. I took out my cell phone, started a Facebook Live, followed him in, and was quickly ushered out. As I was being ushered out, I asked what kind of meeting they were having, and a woman's voice said they're having an education meeting. Plainly, they were not having an education meeting. So up until 5 minutes ago, that the district attorney believed that that observation was relevant to these legal proceedings. And perhaps it still is, but the jury may have enough information without to make a decision.
Have you testified to the grand jury before?
Special purpose grand jury. I testified before the special purpose grand jury.
And what questions did they ask you about that meeting that you were ushered out of?
More or less what I've just described. Why I was there, who am I, what did I observe. They asked me what I did immediately afterwards. I did spend some time afterwards trying to figure out who reserved the room. And it turns out that what do we call it, the Speaker of the House, the Georgia Speaker of the House, Ralston's office had reserved it at the behest of an attorney working for Donald Trump. Also relevant, I think. Nonetheless, they didn't need to hear that.
How many witnesses were left when you were excused? Witnesses were left when
there was one other person who was with me.
Can you tell us who that was?
No. I love you guys, but like the fact that I'm public is a function of my life as a journalist. There are other people who like may have wanted to testify, who didn't, whose privacy should be secure.
So George, as a journalist, you are someone...
Not today. Not to this grand jury. I'm not expecting it. If they call me, I don't expect it.
Do you think a decision will be reached tonight?
I don't know. I would assume so. If they're saying we don't need you, it means that the jury's got the information they need to make a decision one way or another. It's possible that they'll chew on it and then come back tomorrow and chew on it some more. I don't know.
So, George, I want to get your impressions on something. The former president said that this was another one of those perfect phone calls.
Hold that thought.
You said that a second ago.
Yeah. Why do you feel they did not need your testimony?
So I think possibly because it's been really well documented, and possibly because they may have enough information from other sources to come to a conclusion. I don't know. I am not a juror, and it is important to understand that I am not taking a position on whether or not Donald Trump or anybody I saw that day should be indicted. I'm simply here to provide the information I've been asked by the district attorney's office.
Can you tell us exactly what you were told by the prosecutor's team and what you observed in the hours ahead of that statement?
When you say what I was told by
you were told you weren't needed anymore.
Just that, like, thanks, glad you came, you can go home.
And what did you observe up to that in terms of people coming and going?
Well, lots of cops, sheriff's deputies, folks who work as investigators for the district attorney's office, office staff, finding Willis from time to time. Everybody seemed to be in very high spirits. They were chipper and trying to get comfortable because people had been there since way before 9 o'clock in the morning.
So that thought that we're holding now, back to that perfect phone call that the former president said,
part of the
was
reason
11,780 votes. From what you know, what you see.
Are you local, by the way?
I'm national.
Okay. I want to give priority to the people who are Atlanta journalists.
Well, we're all here.
There you
it's
go.
okay. We have someone who can share questions. We're all on the same team here.
Don't you want to ask that question?
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead. I'm just.
So that 11,780 votes, that phone call from the president, from what you know right now, was it perfect?
I don't have an opinion on it.
None at all?
No.
Nothing?
No.
George,
I
you
don't.
didn't testify today, but do you believe you had critical information that could help this grand jury come to a conclusion?
I thought it was possible, but it wasn't up to me to determine whether or not that information was critical. That is entirely up to the 24 people who were chosen by, like, the grand jury process.
If this goes to trial, are you willing to testify, and do you think it's important?
I'll cross that bridge when it comes to it. I don't know.
Like among the witnesses?
So It's funny, we were sitting there, I was there with Jeff Duncan for a while, and I'll talk about Jeff because he's been very public about testifying. Everyone was very calm. We spent a lot of time talking about everything and anything except the case. Because on some level, and it was unspoken, we didn't want to taint each other's testimony. I find Jeff Duncan to be wry and erudite and interesting. And worthy of the position that he has sort of in the media firmament right now.
Have they told you any other expectations, obligations for you?
As far as I know, I'm done. As far as I know, this is it.
What would bring you back?
Another subpoena.
George, thanks.
You bet. Anybody else?
Will you still be covering this indictment even though you're a part of it?
What a good question. I don't know. I'm actually wrestling with that. Like, to what degree am I compromised? Because there's only so